King Lear stands in a storm with no shelter, his retinue and crown gone. Then he looks at a naked beggar and asks, "Is man no more than this?" For centuries, this scene has been remembered as the moment Shakespeare's great king finally loses his mind. The storm becomes the outward expression of Lear's collapse, the heath becomes a landscape of madness, and poor Tom becomes another figure in the king's unraveling. The question Lear asks points towards something much larger. He has spent decades surrounded by people who depend on his approval, in a court where flattery has become the language of power. His daughters know how to perform love for him, yet Cordelia's refusal to perform it costs her everything. The court fool exists because truth requires special permission to reach the king. The storm strips away that machinery. Lear begins to see his kingdom, his subjects, and himself with a clarity his court could never give him. In King Lear, madness becomes the form through which reality finally reaches the king. Grigory Kozantsev's 1971 Soviet film, widely considered among the greatest screen Lears, gives the play an epic social landscape. Lear's kingdom as a place of massive, grinding poverty that exists before the play begins and continues through it. This version of King Lear has real urgency because the social context makes the question of what Lear has not been seeing specific and material. Peter Brook's adaptation, made the same year in fact, went the opposite direction. A bleak, abstract Lear stripped to the essentials, influenced by Beckett, organized around the existential with the social stripped out. Brook's Heath is a landscape of meaninglessness. Ian McKellen's stage Lear in 2007, Jonathan Pryce's in 2012, Anthony Hopkins in the 2018 BBC film. Each one organizes the play around the aging king's decline, the family ingratitude, and the madness of the storm. The storm is the tragedy's crisis, and the division of the kingdom is the fatal error. The ingratitude reading and the madness reading tend to appear together in every production, each one reinforcing the other. What every version systematically underplays is the court, the institution that precedes the storm and produces the conditions for it. The economy of flattery that Goneril and Regan understand and Cordelia refuses. The fool's function is the only official channel for truth. It's the specific political machinery that has made Lear unable to distinguish performance from reality. No individual failure required. This is the second episode of the Shakespeare's Tragedy series, part of an ongoing project on how adaptations and cultural misunderstandings change the warnings their authors were making, and exactly where those changes happen. Hamlet is already up. Julius Caesar is next. Subscribe so you don't miss Caesar, or join as a member for the full 80+ video backlog that got the channel where it is today. The love test is the play's first and most important clue to what Shakespeare was actually building. Lear divides his kingdom before the play's stated business begins. He is asking his daughters to perform their love in language, and the land is distributed according to who performs best. He says the division is so that future strife may be prevented now, which has been read as preventing conflict over the inheritance. But the love test has no connection to that stated purpose. How much someone can say they love you has no bearing on how much they will fight for what they receive. The love test is pure display. Lear wants to hear himself praised in public by his daughters, on an occasion of his own making. Goneril and Regan understand the game. They produce extravagant language, love that exceeds all measure, love that speech cannot contain. They are performing. Lear cannot tell that they're performing because his court has been producing this kind of performance for decades, and he's seen it as the truth. He has no way of calibrating for the difference between performed and the genuine, because the genuine has not been reaching him. Cordelia refuses to perform. "I love your majesty, according to my bond, no more, no less." She will say what is true and no more. This is the most accurate statement of real love in the play's opening scene, but it's the one that destroys Cordelia's inheritance. Lear cannot receive it as love because it sounds like nothing. It is quiet, proportionate, without extravagance. The genuine article is unrecognizable to him. Let's return back to the fool. He's the play's structural argument about what power does to truth. The fool is the only person in Lear's court authorized to tell him the truth. The authorization is formal. The fool's role is to say things that are not otherwise sayable, under the cover of comedy in the costume of his licensed foolishness. He tells Lear he was a fool to give away his authority, that he has made his daughters his mothers, and that he has put down his own breeches. These are true. The fool is the court's pressure valve. He exists to discharge, in comedy, what would be dangerous in earnest. His presence in the play is the surest sign that the court has a systematic problem with the truth. It requires a special role, a licensed exception, to let in truth at all. And even the fool disappears partway through the play, once Lear is in the storm and the court's protective structures have fallen away. Edgar, disguised as poor Tom on the heath, extends the same mechanism. Edgar is a dispossessed legitimate heir, forced to disguise himself as a mad beggar to survive. He becomes, alongside Lear and the fool, one of the play's naked figures, stripped of all social position, exposed to the storm, caring nothing but what he actually is. The heath assembles a group of people who have lost the protective structures of their social positions and are therefore, for the first time, seeing each other as they are. And again, that's the storm's function, the removal of machinery of distortion that social position maintains. When Lear says, "Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this." This is the first moment in the play that Lear accurately perceives the condition of the people his kingdom contains. He's been a king for decades. He's making this observation in the storm, stripped of everything for the first time. That is the play's indictment, aimed far beyond Lear's children at the institution that protected him from seeing his own kingdom for what it was. And now we move on to how the heath became a breakdown instead of a revelation. The madness reading has Aristotelian support. Lear's error at the beginning, the division of the kingdom, the banishment of Cordelia, is the hamartia. The storm is the catastrophe, and the madness is the measure of how far he falls. The tragic structure fits the play at the plot level, and has organized critical interpretation since the 17th century. The Restoration and the 18th century found the play's ending so intolerable that Nahum Tate rewrote it in 1681 to give Cordelia and Lear a happy ending, with Edgar and Cordelia married. This version was performed in place of Shakespeare's original for over 150 years. The original ending, Cordelia dead, Lear dying over her body, the world reduced to ash, was too bleak for audiences who understood the play as a story about a family destroyed by ingratitude. That ingratitude reading produces a play that should be redeemable, a moral lesson that, once learned, ought to produce at least some repair. The social critique reading produces a play that cannot redeem itself because the institution that distorted Lear's perception for decades is not dismantled by his moments of clarity in the storm. Cordelia dies. The clarity was real, yet arrived too late. People often found Cordelia's death so distressing that they could not reread the final scenes. The distress is the madness reading's natural response. An innocent woman has been destroyed by her father's error and her sister's malice, and the play offers nothing to compensate this. The social critique reading produces a different response. Cordelia was always going to be destroyed by the system that could not receive her honesty, and her death is the system's final indictment. The specific distortion that Lear's court produces, the removal of accurate feedback until the institution can tell power only what power wants to hear, is the structural condition of concentrated power in any form and in any era. The people around power have incentives to tell it what it wants to hear, and the people who do are rewarded, while the people who refuse, the Cordelias, the Kents, the fools, are all removed, banished, pushed to the edge of the system where they could do their honest work without disturbing the flattery economy. As time goes on, the institution selects for performers over perceivers, and the person at the center receives an increasingly inaccurate account of their world. This is what Lear was living in, and what the love test reveals, the full operation of the machinery, applied to an occasion where the truth should have been easiest to see, and was still invisible to him. The storm is the machinery's removal. The clarity that follows is what was always there, yet it arrives too late. The institution cannot correct itself from the inside, but any correction from the outside comes at the cost of everything it was protecting. What the text actually has is ripeness is all. Edgar's line to his blinded father Gloucester in despair, the achieved readiness of a person who has finally seen what they needed to see, regardless of what that costs them. Lear achieves that readiness, seeing his kingdom, his daughters, himself, and Cordelia clearly, all of it in the last hours of his life after decades of managed distortion. The tragedy is that the clarity came through the storm, that required the destruction of everything he has to give him access to what was true. The madness was the sanity breaking in, and what came before the storm was the actual loss of mind, the decades of managed perception, the court's efficient removal of anything that might have reached him accurately. Perhaps what matters most here is the fool's line, Lear's shadow. The shadow is the play's subject. The king was always the shadow. The storm just showed the substance. Subscribe to keep up with the series. Thanks for watching, and stay copacetic.